Sarah Martinez walked into the coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. The familiar sting of curious stares followed her as she made her way to the counter. She had grown used to the looks, the whispered comments, and the judgment that seemed to follow her everywhere since she returned home. The intricate tattoo covering her right arm drew attention wherever she went. It wasn't just any tattoo. It was a detailed memorial piece featuring military insignia, dates, and names that held deep meaning for her. Most people saw only the bold artwork stretching from her wrist to her shoulder and made their assumptions about who she was. "Look at that girl," whispered an elderly woman to her companion at a nearby table. "All those tattoos. What kind of example is that setting for young people today?" Sarah pretended not to hear as she ordered her usual black coffee. The barista, a young man with kind eyes, smiled at her genuinely, one of the few people who didn't seem bothered by her appearance. She appreciated these small moments of normalcy. As she waited for her order, Sarah caught fragments of conversations around her. A businessman in an expensive suit shook his head in her direction while talking to his colleague. "Society is going downhill when people think it's appropriate to mark up their bodies like that. No respect for professionalism anymore." Two college-age girls at another table were less subtle. "I don't understand why anyone would do that to themselves," one said loudly enough for Sarah to hear. "It's like they're asking for attention. Probably trying to look tough or something." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. She had learned to develop thick skin over the past 2 years since returning to civilian life. These comments hurt, but not because she was ashamed of her tattoo. They hurt because people couldn't see past the surface to understand what the artwork truly represented. When her coffee was ready, Sarah found a quiet corner table near the window. She pulled out her laptop, hoping to work on her job applications in peace. Finding employment had been more challenging than she anticipated, and she suspected her visible tattoo played a role in some of the rejections she had received. The rain continued to patter against the window as Sarah typed, trying to focus on crafting the perfect cover letter for a position at a local nonprofit organization. The work would be meaningful, helping other veterans transition back to civilian life, but she wondered if they would look past her appearance to see her qualifications. A group of teenagers entered the coffee shop, their voices carrying across the room. They immediately noticed Sarah and began making comments among themselves. "Check out the tattoo sleeve," one of them said. "Bet she thinks she's so cool." Another teenager laughed. "My mom would kill me if I ever got something like that. She probably regrets it now, but it's too late to take it back." Sarah's fingers paused over her keyboard. She wanted to turn around and explain that she had never regretted her tattoo for even a single day. She wanted to tell them about the brothers and sisters whose names were permanently etched into her skin, about the missions that had changed her life forever, about the sacrifice and honor that every line and shade represented. Instead, she took a deep breath and returned to her work. She had learned that trying to explain usually fell on deaf ears. People had already made up their minds about who she was based on what they could see, and very few were interested in learning the truth behind the artwork. The morning continued with the usual mixture of stares, whispers, and occasional direct comments. Sarah had developed coping mechanisms over the months since her discharge from the military. She focused on the positive interactions, like the barista's genuine smile, and tried to let the negative comments roll off her back. As she worked on her laptop, Sarah's mind wandered to her time in service. She remembered the day she had gotten the tattoo, shortly after returning from her final deployment. The tattoo artist had worked for hours, carefully crafting each detail according to her specifications. Every element had been chosen with purpose, every name placed with reverence. The coffee shop began to fill with the lunch crowd, bringing fresh waves of curious glances and hushed conversations. Sarah was accustomed to being the subject of such attention, but today felt particularly heavy. Perhaps it was the job interview she had scheduled for later that afternoon, or maybe it was just the accumulation of months of similar experiences. She closed her laptop and gathered her things, preparing to leave for her interview. As she stood up, she heard one more comment from a middle-aged man reading a newspaper at a nearby table. "Kids these days have no respect for their bodies," he muttered to his wife. "That girl probably has no idea how that tattoo is going to affect her future." Sarah paused for a moment, then walked toward the door. The man had no idea how much that tattoo had already affected her future. Not in the way he imagined, but in ways that ran much deeper than professional concerns. It connected her to a brotherhood and sisterhood that most civilians would never understand. It honored fallen friends whose memories she carried every day. As she stepped out into the rain, Sarah pulled her jacket closed and headed toward her car. She had an interview to prepare for, and despite the morning's familiar chorus of judgment, she remained hopeful that somewhere out there was an employer who would see her qualifications and character, rather than making assumptions based on her appearance. The afternoon interview would be another test of whether she could find a place in civilian society, where her service and skills were valued more than the artwork on her arm. She had faced more dangerous challenges than a job interview, and she wasn't about to give up now. The job interview at the Veterans Nonprofit Organization went better than Sarah had expected. The director, a former Army officer himself, seemed more interested in her qualifications and experience than her appearance. Still, she noticed him glancing at her tattoo several times during their conversation, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it might influence his final decision. Walking back to her car after the interview, Sarah decided to stop by the grocery store to pick up essentials for the week. The automatic doors slid open and she grabbed a shopping cart, already mentally preparing herself for the usual routine of stares and whispers that followed her in public spaces. The grocery store was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. Families with children filled the aisles, elderly couples moved slowly with their carts, and young professionals hurried through their shopping during lunch breaks. Sarah moved efficiently through the produce section, selecting vegetables while trying to ignore the sideways glances from other shoppers. A mother with 2 young children passed by, and Sarah heard the woman quickly usher her kids away. "Don't stare," the mother whispered, but not quietly enough. "It's not polite." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that the mother's own obvious avoidance was teaching her children to judge others based on appearance. In the cereal aisle, Sarah encountered a situation that had become all too familiar. An elderly man in a veteran's cap was struggling to reach a box of cereal on a high shelf. Without hesitation, she approached him and offered to help. "Let me get that for you," Sarah said with a warm smile, easily reaching the box he had been trying to grab. The man accepted her help gratefully, but when he turned to thank her properly, his eyes immediately went to her tattoo. His grateful expression shifted to one of disapproval. "Thank you," he said curtly, his tone notably cooler than it had been moments before. Sarah felt the familiar sting of rejection. This man was clearly a veteran himself based on his cap and bearing, yet he was judging her just like everyone else. She wanted to tell him about her own service, about the battles they might have in common, about the brotherhood they shared. Instead, she simply nodded and continued with her shopping. At the checkout line, Sarah found herself behind a group of teenagers who kept turning around to look at her tattoo and giggle among themselves. Their comments were barely disguised as whispers. "Do you think it hurt to get all that done?" one asked. "She probably thinks she looks so tough," another replied. "I bet she's never even been in a real fight." The irony of that comment almost made Sarah laugh out loud. If only they knew about the real fights she had been in, the life and death situations she had faced, the courage it had taken to serve her country in combat zones. But explaining would only draw more attention, and she had learned that most people weren't genuinely interested in understanding. The cashier, a young woman about Sarah's age, greeted her professionally but kept glancing nervously at the tattoo throughout the transaction. Sarah could see the questions in her eyes, the assumptions being formed, the judgments being made. As Sarah loaded her groceries into her car, she noticed a small crowd gathering near the store's entrance. Curious despite herself, she walked closer to see what was happening. A local news crew had set up their equipment and was interviewing shoppers about community safety and local issues. The reporter, a polished woman in a business suit, was asking people about their perceptions of the neighborhood and what changes they'd like to see. Sarah listened as various residents shared their thoughts about improving local schools, increasing police presence, and maintaining family-friendly environments. Then the reporter approached a well-dressed couple in their 50s. "What would you like to see change in this community?" she asked, holding out her microphone. The woman glanced around before answering, her eyes briefly landing on Sarah standing nearby. "Well, I think we need to maintain certain standards," she said carefully. "Some of the younger people today don't seem to understand how their appearance affects the whole community's image. We want this to be a place where families feel comfortable. Her husband nodded in agreement. There's a lack of respect for traditional values. People make choices about how they present themselves without thinking about how it impacts others, especially children who might see them as role models. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as she realized the couple was essentially talking about people like her while she stood within earshot. The reporter nodded and moved on to interview other shoppers, but the damage was done. Sarah had been reduced to a symbol of everything these people thought was wrong with their community. Walking back to her car, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her younger brother Mike, who was still active duty Navy. "Hey sis, how's civilian life treating you? Still fighting the good fight on the home front?" Sarah smiled despite her frustration. Mike was one of the few people who truly understood what her tattoo meant and why she had chosen to honor their fallen comrades in such a permanent way. His support meant everything to her during these difficult transition months. She typed back, "Some days are harder than others. People see the ink but not the story behind it." Mike's response came quickly. "Their loss. You know who you are and what you've done. That's what matters." As Sarah drove home, she reflected on the day's events. The job interview had given her hope, but the grocery store experience reminded her of the daily challenges she faced. Every public outing became a test of her resilience, every interaction a potential moment of judgment or misunderstanding. She thought about the elderly veteran who had initially been grateful for her help, but then turned cold when he saw her tattoo. It bothered her more than the teenager's comments or the couple's interview with the news crew. Veterans should understand each other, should recognize the bonds of service that transcended appearance. But perhaps, Sarah thought, that was exactly the problem. People, even veterans, had preconceived notions about what a soldier should look like, how they should present themselves, what choices they should make about their bodies and their lives. Her tattoo told a story that most people would never take the time to read or understand. It honored friends who had made the ultimate sacrifice, commemorated missions that had tested her courage and resolve, and served as a daily reminder of the bonds forged in the crucible of combat. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Sarah made a decision. Tomorrow she would continue applying for jobs, continue facing the stares and whispers, continue living her life with dignity despite the judgment of others. She had faced enemy fire and survived. She could certainly handle the disapproval of strangers who knew nothing about her story. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's interview at the Veterans Nonprofit, and she still hadn't heard back. The silence was becoming its own answer, and she was starting to wonder if her appearance had indeed influenced their decision. She had submitted dozens of applications to various organizations, but the responses were few and far between. On this particular Friday morning, Sarah decided to treat herself to breakfast at a small diner downtown. She had received her monthly disability check from the VA, and while the money was modest, it was enough to afford small luxuries like eating out occasionally. The diner was a local institution, the kind of place where regulars had their favorite booths and the waitresses knew everyone's usual order. Sarah had never been there before, but she had heard good things about their breakfast menu and their support for local veterans. As she entered the diner, Sarah immediately felt the familiar sensation of becoming the center of attention. Conversations quieted slightly as heads turned to look at her, eyes inevitably drawn to the intricate tattoo covering her arm. She had chosen to wear a sleeveless top, despite knowing it would attract attention, partly as an act of defiance and partly because she refused to hide who she was. The hostess, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, greeted Sarah warmly. "Good morning, honey. Just one for breakfast?" "Yes, please," Sarah replied, grateful for the woman's genuine smile and lack of obvious judgment. "Right this way." "Dear." The hostess led Sarah to a booth near the window, away from the main crowd but still visible to the other diners. As Sarah settled into her seat and picked up the menu, she couldn't help but notice the conversations happening around her. A table of construction workers was speaking loudly enough for her to overhear. "I'm telling you, standards are slipping everywhere," one of them said. "Used to be, people knew how to present themselves properly in public. Now look what walks in here." Another worker shook his head. "My daughter wanted to get a tattoo last year. I told her over my dead body. That stuff is permanent and it sends the wrong message to employers, to society." Sarah's grip tightened on her menu, But she forced herself to focus on choosing her breakfast order. She had learned to tune out such comments, but some days they hit harder than others. The waitress approached her table, a young woman with multiple ear piercings and a small tattoo visible on her wrist. "Hi there, I'm Jenny. What can I get started for you this morning?" Sarah felt a small sense of relief at being served by someone who might understand what it was like to face judgment based on appearance. "I'll have the veteran special, please. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and coffee." Jenny's expression brightened. "Are you military?" "Former Army," Sarah confirmed. "Just got out about 8 months ago." "Thank you for your service," Jenny said sincerely. "My boyfriend is deployed right now. Marines." This brief moment of connection felt like a small victory in Sarah's day. Here was someone who understood, who didn't make assumptions based on her tattoo, who saw her as a person first. While waiting for her food, Sarah checked her email on her phone and found a message from the veterans nonprofit. Her heart sank as she read the polite rejection letter, thanking her for her interest but informing her that they had decided to go with another candidate. No specific reason was given, but Sarah couldn't help wondering if her appearance had played a role. "Excuse me, miss," an elderly voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah looked up to see a man in his 70s standing beside her table. He wore a ball cap with Navy insignia and used a walking cane to support himself. His expression was serious but not unkind. "I hope you don't mind me asking," he continued, "but I couldn't help noticing your tattoo. Are those military symbols I see there?" Sarah tensed slightly, unsure whether this would be another lecture about appropriate appearance or something else entirely. "Yes, sir. It's a memorial piece," the old man nodded slowly. "May I ask which branch you served in?" "Army, sir. 2 tours in Afghanistan." His weathered face softened slightly. "I was Navy myself. Korea and Vietnam." He paused, studying her tattoo more carefully. "Those names on your arm, are they?" "Friends who didn't make it home," Sarah finished quietly. The man was silent for a long moment, and Sarah could see him processing this information. She watched as his initial curiosity transformed into something that looked like understanding. "I have names too," he said finally. "Not on my skin, but carved in my heart just the same." He extended his hand to her. "Frank Morrison, Petty Officer First Class, retired." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Sarah Martinez, Sergeant, Army Rangers." Frank's eyebrows raised slightly at the mention of Rangers, clearly recognizing the significance of that designation. "Rangers, huh? That's no joke. You saw real action over there." "Yes, sir, I did." Frank glanced around the diner, then back at Sarah. "Mind if I sit for a minute? These old legs aren't what they used to be." Sarah gestured to the seat across from her, and Frank eased himself into the booth with obvious relief. "You know," he said, "when I first walked in here and saw you, I'll admit I made some assumptions. Saw the tattoo and thought what a lot of folks probably think." Sarah prepared herself for another lecture, but Frank surprised her. "Then I got closer and recognized some of those symbols. Started thinking about the young people I knew who came back from Vietnam, with their own ways of dealing with what they'd seen, what they'd lost. Made me realize I was being an old fool." Jenny returned with Sarah's breakfast, setting the plate down with a smile. Frank ordered coffee and continued talking. "The thing is," Frank said, "every generation of veterans finds their own way to honor the fallen, to process what they've been through. In my day, we mostly kept it inside, didn't talk about it much. Maybe that wasn't always the best way." Sarah took a bite of her eggs, considering his words carefully. "Some people think tattoos are disrespectful or unprofessional." "Some people think a lot of things," Frank replied. "But I've learned that what matters isn't how you choose to remember. It's that you do remember. Those boys whose names you carry deserve to be honored, and if that's how you choose to do it, then that's between you and them." The construction workers from the nearby table were finishing their meal and preparing to leave. As they passed Sarah's booth, one of them made a point of looking directly at her tattoo and shaking his head in disapproval. Frank noticed the interaction and turned to watch the men leave. "Idiots," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "They have no idea what real sacrifice looks like." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the hot coffee. For the first time in months, she was sitting across from someone who understood, someone who saw past the surface to recognize what her tattoo truly represented. "Thank you," she said softly. "You have no idea how much this conversation means to me." Frank smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Oh, I think I have some idea. The transition back home isn't easy for any of us. and it's probably even harder for your generation with all the social media and constant judgment. They sat together for another 20 minutes, sharing stories about military life, discussing the challenges of veteran health care, and finding common ground across their different eras of service. When Frank finally stood to leave, he shook Sarah's hand again. "You keep your head up, Sergeant Martinez. You've earned the right to honor your fallen however you see fit. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Sarah's conversation with Frank at the diner had lifted her spirits, but the following weeks brought fresh challenges. The job market remained difficult, and she was starting to worry about her finances. Her savings from the military were dwindling, and the monthly disability check wasn't enough to cover all her expenses in the long term. She had started taking on odd jobs to make ends meet: house cleaning, dog walking, anything that would bring in a few extra dollars. Most of these opportunities came through online platforms where her appearance wasn't immediately visible, but eventually she had to meet clients face to face. On a humid Thursday morning, Sarah arrived at a large suburban house to clean for a new client. Mrs. Henderson had seemed pleasant enough over the phone, but when she opened the door and saw Sarah's tattoo, her demeanor changed noticeably. "Oh," Mrs. Henderson said, taking a step back. "I wasn't expecting. I mean, you look different than I imagined." Sarah had learned to address these situations directly. "Is there a problem with my appearance, ma'am? I can assure you that my work quality isn't affected by my tattoos." Mrs. Henderson hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's just that we have young children in the neighborhood, and I'm not sure what kind of message. I mean, what would people think if they saw—" "If they saw what exactly?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Well, someone with all those tattoos working in our neighborhood. People might get the wrong idea about the kind of people we associate with." Sarah felt the familiar sting of rejection, but this time it was accompanied by financial stress. She needed this job, but she also needed to maintain her dignity. "I understand your concerns," Sarah said carefully. "Perhaps it would be best if we canceled today's appointment." Mrs. Henderson looked relieved. "Yes, I think that would be for the best. I'm sorry for any inconvenience." As Sarah walked back to her car, she felt defeated. This was the third cleaning job she had lost in 2 weeks, and she was beginning to wonder if she would ever find stable employment. The tattoo that meant so much to her personally was becoming a barrier to basic survival. Her phone rang as she sat in her car trying to compose herself. It was her brother Mike calling from his base. "Hey sis, how's things going?" Sarah considered lying, telling him everything was fine, but she was too exhausted to put on a brave face. "Honestly, Mike, things are rough. I just lost another job because of the tattoo. I'm starting to wonder if getting it was a mistake." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. When Mike spoke again, his voice was serious. "Sarah, don't you dare start thinking like that. That tattoo represents everything we've fought for, everyone we've lost. Don't let some ignorant civilians make you regret honoring our brothers and sisters." "But I need to eat, Mike. I need a place to live. Maybe if I got it covered up or removed—" "Listen to me," Mike interrupted. "You're a damn Army Ranger. You've been through hell and back. You're not going to let a bunch of suburban housewives break you down. There are people out there who will value you for who you are, for what you've done. You just haven't found them yet." His words helped, but they didn't solve her immediate financial problems. After hanging up, Sarah drove to the VA hospital for her monthly appointment with her counselor. These sessions were supposed to help with her transition to civilian life, but lately they felt more like an hour of venting frustration. Dr. Williams was a kind woman in her 50s who had been working with veterans for over a decade. She had seen Sarah through some difficult months and had always been supportive of her choices, including the memorial tattoo. "You seem more stressed than usual today," Dr. Williams observed as they settled into her office. Sarah explained the morning's events and her growing financial concerns. Dr. Williams listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Have you considered looking into veteran-owned businesses or organizations specifically focused on hiring veterans?" Dr. Williams suggested. "Sometimes they're more understanding of the different ways people process their service experiences. I've tried a few, but even some veteran-owned companies seem to have the same prejudices about appearance." Dr. Williams nodded thoughtfully. "What about reaching out to other veterans in your area? There might be informal networks or support groups that could provide job leads." That afternoon, Sarah decided to visit the local VFW post. She had avoided it so far, partly because she wasn't sure how the older veterans would react to her appearance, and partly because she sometimes felt disconnected from veterans of previous conflicts. The VFW hall was a modest building with American flags displayed prominently outside. Sarah took a deep breath and walked through the front door. The interior was decorated with military memorabilia from various conflicts, and several older men sat at the bar watching a baseball game on television. The conversation stopped when Sarah entered, and she felt the familiar weight of scrutinizing stares. An elderly man behind the bar, who appeared to be in his 60s, looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his tone neither welcoming nor hostile. "I'm looking for information about the VFW. I'm a veteran myself and thought I might join." "What branch?" another man at the bar asked. "Army. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Rangers." This information seemed to shift the atmosphere slightly. The men exchanged glances, and Sarah could see them reassessing her despite her appearance. "Rangers, huh?" the bartender said. "That's serious business. When did you get out?" "About 8 months ago." An older man at the end of the bar, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "That tattoo on your arm, are those military symbols?" Sarah nodded. "It's a memorial for friends I lost during my deployments." The man studied her tattoo more carefully, then looked back at her face. "I lost friends too, Vietnam. Different war, same pain." Another veteran at the bar turned around to face her. "You know, when you first walked in here, I'll be honest, I was thinking all sorts of things about young people today and their tattoos. But if that's how you choose to honor the fallen, then I respect that." The bartender extended his hand to Sarah. "Name's Pete. I was Marines. Gulf War. Welcome to the VFW." As Sarah shook hands with Pete and introduced herself to the other veterans, she felt a sense of belonging that had been missing since her discharge. These men understood loss, sacrifice, and the bonds forged in combat. They might have initial reservations about her appearance, but they were willing to look beyond the surface to see her service and character. "You know," Pete said as he poured Sarah a beer, "there's a guy who comes in here sometimes. Navy SEAL commander, retired. He's been talking about starting a non-profit to help veterans with job placement and transition services. Might be worth talking to him." "When does he usually come in?" Sarah asked. "Actually, he's supposed to be here tonight for our monthly meeting. You should stick around and meet him." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there were people out there who would see past her tattoo to recognize her skills and dedication. Maybe the VFW would become the supportive community she had been searching for since leaving the military. Sarah decided to stay for the VFW meeting that evening. As more veterans began arriving, she noticed the diverse group of men and women representing different branches of service and various conflicts. Some were welcoming, while others seemed reserved about the newcomer with the prominent tattoo. The meeting covered typical VFW business, upcoming fundraisers, community service projects, and support for local veteran families in need. Sarah listened quietly, appreciating the sense of purpose and camaraderie in the room, even if she didn't feel completely accepted yet. About halfway through the meeting, the front door opened and a tall man in his 50s entered. He moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command, and Sarah immediately noticed the respectful attention he received from the other veterans in the room. "Sorry I'm late," the man said, taking an empty chair near the back. Traffic was murder coming from the city. Pete, who was running the meeting, nodded toward the newcomer. "No problem, Commander. We were just discussing the holiday fundraiser." Sarah studied the man Pete had called Commander. His graying hair was neatly trimmed, and despite wearing civilian clothes, everything about his posture and demeanor spoke of military discipline. This had to be the retired SEAL commander Pete had mentioned. When the formal meeting ended, veterans began breaking into smaller groups for informal conversation. Sarah found herself standing somewhat apart from the groups, still feeling like an outsider despite the earlier warm reception from Pete and a few others. The SEAL commander approached her with a direct, assessing gaze that Sarah recognized from her own military experience. Officers developed a way of evaluating people quickly and thoroughly. "I don't think we've met," he said, extending his hand. "Commander David Richardson, Navy SEALs. Retired. Sergeant Sarah Martinez, Army Rangers. Recently discharged." Commander Richardson's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Rangers, just as Frank's had at the diner. "Rangers, that's elite special operations. What was your MOS?" 11 Bravo Infantry. But I also did EOD work during my second deployment. Explosive ordnance disposal. Richardson nodded approvingly. That takes nerves of steel. Where were you deployed? Afghanistan, both tours. Helmand Province the first time, Kandahar the second. As they talked, Sarah noticed that Commander Richardson's eyes occasionally glanced at her tattoo, but unlike most people, he seemed to be studying it with interest rather than judgment. His expression was thoughtful, almost analytical. That's quite an intricate piece of artwork on your arm, he finally commented. Military-themed? It's a memorial, Sarah explained, the same response she had given dozens of times to dozens of people. May I take a closer look? Richardson asked. I promise I'm not just being nosy. There's a reason I'm asking. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then rolled up her sleeve further to give him a better view. Richardson studied the tattoo carefully, his expression growing more serious as he took in the details. These dates, he said, pointing to specific elements, they correspond to major operations in Afghanistan. Yes, sir. And these names, friends who didn't make it home. Richardson was quiet for a long moment, continuing to examine the tattoo with the focus of someone who understood military symbolism and history. Finally, he looked back up at Sarah's face. How many people have actually asked you about the meaning behind this tattoo? Sarah thought about it. Maybe 3 or 4 in the 8 months since I got it. Most people just see the artwork and make assumptions. What kind of assumptions? That I'm trying to look tough, that I'm unprofessional, that I'm setting a bad example for young people, that I'm the kind of person who makes poor decisions and doesn't respect social norms. Richardson shook his head slowly. Do you know what I see when I look at this tattoo? No, sir. I see someone who understands the true cost of freedom. I see someone who has looked death in the face and continued to serve anyway. I see someone who cares enough about fallen comrades to carry their memory permanently on her skin. Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. It had been so long since someone had understood, had seen the honor in her choice rather than the supposed shame. The artwork itself is extraordinary, Richardson continued. Whoever did this understood military history and symbolism. Every element has meaning, doesn't it? Yes, sir. I worked with the artist for months to get every detail right. I can tell. Richardson paused, then asked, What's your current employment situation? I'm between jobs at the moment, Sarah admitted, not wanting to go into the details of her recent rejections. Would you be interested in discussing some opportunities? I'm starting a consulting firm that specializes in security and risk assessment for corporations and government agencies. We need people with real-world experience, people who understand what actual danger looks like. Sarah's heart began to race. Yes, sir. I would be very interested. The thing is, Richardson said, most of our potential clients are older, more conservative business leaders. They might have initial reactions to visible tattoos similar to what you've probably experienced in other job searches. Sarah's hopes began to sink again. But Richardson wasn't finished, however. Once they understand what that tattoo represents, once they realize they're looking at someone who has proven their courage and commitment in the most extreme circumstances possible, their perspective tends to change dramatically. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. Call my office next week and set up a formal interview. But I want you to know something. If you have the skills and experience I think you do, that tattoo won't be a liability in my organization. It will be proof of your character. As Richardson walked away to talk with other veterans, Sarah stared at the business card in her hand. She felt like she was holding a lifeline, a chance to finally work for someone who understood the true meaning of her choices. Pete approached her with a smile. I see you met the commander. What did you think? I think, Sarah said slowly, that maybe my luck is finally starting to turn around. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations with other veterans, many of whom approached her after seeing her talking with Commander Richardson. Word had spread quickly through the group about her Ranger background and EOD experience, and suddenly she found herself welcomed into conversations about deployment experiences and the challenges of transitioning back to civilian life. An older Air Force veteran named Janet shared her own struggles with finding employment after leaving the military. It's different for women, she said. People have expectations about how we should look and act, and when we don't fit their neat little boxes, they don't know what to do with us. A Marine who had served in Iraq nodded in agreement. I've got friends who covered up their military tattoos just to get jobs. Breaks my heart to see warriors hiding who they are to please people who never served a day in their lives. For the first time since her discharge, Sarah felt like she was among people who truly understood. These veterans had their own stories of sacrifice and service, their own ways of honoring fallen comrades, their own struggles with a civilian world that often failed to appreciate what they had given up for their country. As the evening wound down, Commander Richardson approached her one more time. I meant what I said about calling my office. We need people like you, people who understand what real courage looks like. Thank you, sir. I'll call first thing Monday morning. One more thing, Richardson said. That tattoo of yours, it tells a story that needs to be heard. Don't let anyone convince you to hide it or be ashamed of it. In my experience, the people worth working for will respect what it represents. Driving home that night, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. She thought about Commander Richardson's words, about the way he had studied her tattoo with respect rather than judgment, about the possibility of working for someone who valued her military experience rather than seeing it as a liability. She also thought about the other veterans at the VFW, how they had initially been skeptical, but had opened up once they understood her background. Maybe the key wasn't hiding who she was or changing herself to fit other people's expectations. Maybe the key was finding the right people. People who understood the true meaning of service and sacrifice. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her brother Mike. How did things go today? Still thinking about covering up the tattoo? Sarah smiled as she typed her response. Not anymore. I think I might have found some people who actually get it. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She spent the day researching Commander Richardson's company, preparing for the interview she would schedule on Monday. For the first time since her discharge, she felt like her military experience might actually be an asset, rather than something she needed to downplay. She also decided to return to the coffee shop where this journey had begun, where she had sat surrounded by whispered judgments and disapproving stares. But this time she walked in with her head held high, wearing a sleeveless shirt that showed her tattoo clearly. The familiar stares followed her to the counter. The whispered comments continued at nearby tables, but somehow they didn't carry the same weight they had before. She had found her tribe, people who understood and respected her choices. The opinions of strangers suddenly seemed much less important. As she waited for her coffee, Sarah overheard two young women at a nearby table talking about tattoos and whether they would ever get one. One of them noticed Sarah and gestured discreetly in her direction. I wonder if she regrets it, one of them said. That's so much ink. It must have cost a fortune and now she's stuck with it forever. Sarah turned around and approached their table with a confident smile. Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. You were wondering if I regret my tattoo? The two women looked embarrassed at being overheard, but Sarah's friendly demeanor put them slightly at ease. I was just curious, one of them admitted. It's so extensive. I understand the curiosity, Sarah said. And to answer your question, no, I don't regret it for a single second. This tattoo honors friends who died serving our country. Every line, every symbol, every name has meaning. It's not just artwork. It's a memorial. The women's expressions changed from curiosity to something approaching respect. We had no idea, one of them said softly. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Sarah replied. And remember, everyone's tattoos tell a story. You might be surprised by what those stories contain if you take the time to ask. As Sarah left the coffee shop that day, she realized that Commander Richardson had been right. The people worth knowing, worth working for, worth surrounding herself with would respect what her tattoo represented. The rest simply didn't matter. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, and Sarah felt energized as she prepared for the most important phone call she had made since leaving the military. She had spent the weekend researching Commander Richardson's consulting firm and preparing thoughtful questions about the position and company culture. At exactly 9 o'clock, she dialed the number on the business card. A professional receptionist answered and transferred her to Commander Richardson's assistant, who scheduled an interview for Thursday afternoon at their downtown office. Commander Richardson asked me to let you know that this will be a working interview, the assistant explained. He'll want to discuss a current case study and get your perspective on some security challenges. Plan for about 2 hours. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been hoping for, a chance to use her military experience and analytical skills in a meaningful way. The next few days passed slowly as Sarah prepared for the interview. She researched the company's previous projects, reviewed current events that might impact security consulting, and practiced articulating how her combat experience translated to civilian security challenges. Thursday afternoon, Sarah arrived at the downtown office building 15 minutes early. The consulting firm occupied the entire 15th floor, with modern offices and a reception area decorated with subtle military memorabilia and awards. The atmosphere was professional, but clearly influenced by military culture. Commander Richardson greeted her personally in the lobby, wearing a crisp business suit but maintaining the same authoritative presence she remembered from the VFW. "Sergeant Martinez, good to see you again. Ready for a real interview this time?" "Yes, sir. Thank you for this opportunity." Richardson led her to a conference room where two other people were waiting, a woman in her 40s wearing Navy insignia on a small lapel pin, and a younger man who carried himself with obvious military bearing. "I'd like you to meet Commander Lisa Chen, former Navy intelligence, and Captain Robert Torres, Army Special Forces. They're part of our senior consulting team." Sarah shook hands with both colleagues, immediately feeling more comfortable in the presence of fellow veterans. She noticed that neither of them showed any reaction to her visible tattoo beyond brief, professional acknowledgement. "We're going to dive right into a case study," Richardson explained, handing Sarah a folder. "This is a real situation one of our corporate clients is facing. Take a few minutes to review the materials, then we'll discuss your assessment and recommendations." Sarah opened the folder to find detailed briefing materials about a multinational corporation with facilities in several countries experiencing elevated security threats. The documentation included intelligence reports, facility layouts, and previous incident analyses. As she studied the materials, Sarah felt her military training kick in. She began identifying patterns, potential vulnerabilities, and strategic considerations that would impact security planning. This was exactly the kind of analytical work she had done during her deployments, just applied to a corporate environment instead of a combat zone. After 20 minutes of review, Sarah looked up to find the three senior consultants watching her with interest. "What's your initial assessment?" Commander Chen asked. Sarah organized her thoughts and began presenting her analysis. She identified three primary threat vectors, discussed how the company's international footprint created specific vulnerabilities, and recommended a layered security approach that addressed both physical and operational concerns. "The pattern of incidents suggests this isn't random criminal activity," Sarah explained. "Someone has been conducting surveillance and testing response times. The attacks on secondary facilities appear designed to draw security resources away from primary targets." Captain Torres leaned forward with interest. "What would you recommend for the Jakarta facility specifically?" Sarah referred back to the briefing materials and outlined a comprehensive security plan that incorporated lessons learned from her EOD experience and understanding of insurgent tactics. She discussed how to harden the facility without creating an obvious fortress mentality that might impact business operations. The three senior consultants exchanged glances that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. Had she missed something important? Were her recommendations too aggressive or not aggressive enough? Commander Richardson finally broke the silence. "That's exactly the assessment our team reached after 2 weeks of analysis. You got there in 20 minutes. More importantly," Commander Chen added, "you understood the intelligence implications behind the incident pattern. That takes real experience reading threat assessments." Sarah felt a surge of relief and pride. This was what she had been hoping. For someone a chance to demonstrate that her military experience had given her valuable skills that translated directly to civilian challenges. "Now, for the difficult question," Richardson said, "how do you think our corporate clients will react to your appearance? These are often conservative business leaders who may have preconceptions about tattoos." Sarah had been expecting this question and had prepared a thoughtful response. "Sir, I believe the key is context and presentation. If I walk into a meeting and the first thing clients see is my tattoo, they'll make assumptions. But if they first see my analysis, my recommendations, and my understanding of their security challenges, then the tattoo becomes secondary. And if they ask about it directly," Captain Torres prompted, I'll tell them the truth, that it's a memorial to fallen comrades, that it represents values like loyalty, sacrifice, and commitment to mission, values that directly translate to protecting their corporate interests and personnel. Commander Chen nodded approvingly. We found that most business leaders actually respond well to that explanation, once they understand the context. The interview continued for another hour, covering Sarah's deployment experiences, her transition challenges, and her long-term career goals. Throughout the conversation, Sarah felt increasingly confident that she had found the right fit. Finally, Richardson leaned back in his chair. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. We want to offer you a position as a security analyst with our firm. The starting salary is $65,000, plus benefits and potential for rapid advancement based on performance. Sarah felt tears of relief beginning to form. Thank you, sir. I accept. There's one condition, Richardson continued. You'll be working directly with corporate clients from day one. Some of them may initially react to your tattoo with surprise or even skepticism. We need to know that you're prepared to handle those situations professionally and confidently. I understand, sir. I've been dealing with those reactions for months now. I'm ready to represent the firm professionally while staying true to who I am. Commander Chen smiled. We think your tattoo might actually become an asset with the right clients. There's something powerful about having security advice come from someone who has literally put their life on the line for others. As the interview concluded, Richardson walked Sarah back to the elevator. Start Monday morning. We'll begin with orientation and introduce you to your first project team. Standing in the elevator as the doors closed, Sarah looked at her reflection and saw something she hadn't seen in months. A professional with valuable skills and a bright future ahead. Her tattoo was still there, still visible, still meaningful, but for the first time since leaving the military, it wasn't a barrier to her goals. That evening, Sarah called her brother Mike to share the good news. You were right, she told him. I just needed to find the right people, people who understand what service really means. I'm proud of you, sis. You never gave up, never compromised who you are. That takes real courage. As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that Mike was right. It had taken courage to stay true to herself despite months of rejection and judgment. But that courage was about to pay off in ways she had barely dared to hope for. 6 months had passed since Sarah joined Commander Richardson's consulting firm, and her life had transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. She had quickly established herself as one of their most valuable analysts, and her unique combination of combat experience and analytical skills had impressed even the most skeptical corporate clients. On this particular Wednesday morning, Sarah was preparing for a presentation to the board of directors of a major manufacturing company that had facilities in several high-risk countries. It was her biggest client presentation yet, and she knew that some of the board members had initially expressed concerns about working with someone so young when they learned she would be leading their security assessment. Sarah, dressed carefully in a professional business suit, but deliberately chose a blouse that would allow her tattoo to be partially visible. She had learned over the past months that hiding it created more problems than showing it confidently and being prepared to explain its significance. The presentation went exceptionally well. Sarah's detailed analysis of threats facing their international facilities, combined with her practical recommendations for enhanced security measures, clearly impressed the board members. Several of them asked pointed questions that demonstrated they understood both the complexity of the challenges and the value of her military experience. After the formal presentation, during the question and answer session, the company's chairman, a distinguished man in his 70s, asked the question Sarah had been expecting. Ms. Martinez, I couldn't help but notice the artwork on your arm. Some of our shareholders and business partners are quite conservative in their views. How do you think they might react to working with someone with such visible tattoos? Sarah had fielded this question dozens of times over the past months, and she had developed a response that was both professional and personal. Sir, I understand that concern and I appreciate you raising it directly. This tattoo is a memorial to 7 soldiers who died under my command during my deployments in Afghanistan. Each name, each symbol, each date represents someone who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. She paused, allowing that information to sink in before continuing. I chose to honor their memory in this permanent way because I believe they deserve to be remembered every day, not just on Memorial Day or Veterans Day. The values they died for, loyalty, courage, sacrifice, and commitment to mission, are the same values I bring to protecting your company's assets and personnel. The room was completely silent for a moment. Then the chairman nodded slowly. Thank you for that explanation. I think most reasonable people would understand and respect that choice. Another board member, a woman in her 60s, spoke up. My son served in Iraq. He came home with his own struggles, his own ways of processing what he experienced. I think it's remarkable that you found a way to honor your fallen friends while building a successful career. After the meeting concluded, Sarah was gathering her materials when the chairman approached her privately. Ms. Martinez, I owe you an apology. When I first saw your tattoo, I made assumptions based on my own limited experience and outdated thinking. Your presentation today was outstanding, and your explanation of that memorial tattoo was both moving and enlightening. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your openness to understanding. I have a grandson who's considering military service, the chairman continued. Would you be willing to speak with him sometime? I think he could benefit from hearing about your experiences. Sarah smiled. I'd be honored to talk with him. As she left the corporate building that afternoon, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since those difficult early months after her discharge. She now had a career that utilized her skills and experience, colleagues who respected her service, and clients who valued her expertise. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Commander Richardson. Heard the presentation went exceptionally well. The client wants to expand our contract to include their European facilities. Congratulations. That evening, Sarah decided to return to the coffee shop where her story had begun, the place where she had sat surrounded by judgment and whispered criticisms, wondering if she would ever find acceptance in civilian society. The same barista who had always been kind to her was working behind the counter, and he greeted her with a genuine smile. Haven't seen you in a while. How are things going? Much better, thank you. I found a job where my experience is actually valued. As Sarah waited for her coffee, she noticed a young woman sitting alone at a corner table. The woman appeared to be in her 20s, wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm weather, and she kept glancing nervously around the coffee shop. Sarah's trained eye caught a glimpse of what looked like the edge of a tattoo peeking out from the woman's sleeve. More importantly, she recognized the body language of someone trying to hide, someone dealing with judgment and criticism. With her coffee in hand, Sarah approached the young woman's table. Excuse me, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you by any chance a veteran? The woman looked up with surprise. How did you... The way you're sitting, the way you're observing the room. Plus, I think I caught a glimpse of what might be military ink under your sleeve. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Marines. Got out 6 months ago. Army Rangers, Sarah replied, extending her hand. Sarah Martinez. Jessica Cole. Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from Jessica. Mind if I sit for a minute? Jessica nodded, and Sarah noticed her glancing at the visible portion of Sarah's tattoo. Is that military? Jessica asked quietly. Memorial piece for friends I lost in Afghanistan. What about yours? Jessica looked around the coffee shop nervously, then slowly rolled up her sleeve to reveal a Marine Corps tattoo with similar memorial elements. I keep it covered, Jessica explained. People don't understand. They see the tattoo and think I'm trying to look tough or be rebellious. Sarah smiled with understanding. I used to think I had to hide mine too. Spent months getting rejected from jobs, dealing with judgmental comments, wondering if I should get it removed. What changed? I found the right people. People who understood what it really means, what it represents. There are employers out there, communities out there, who will value you for your service and respect your choices. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out one of her business cards. My company is always looking for qualified veterans. If you're interested in security consulting work, give me a call. Jessica looked at the card with surprise. You really think my tattoo wouldn't be a problem? I think your tattoo would be proof of your character and values. The right employer will see it the same way. As Sarah prepared to leave, Jessica called out to her. Thank you. For the first time in months, I feel like maybe things might work out. They will, Sarah assured her. Just don't compromise who you are to please people who don't understand what service means. Walking back to her car, Sarah realized that her journey had come full circle. She had started in this coffee shop feeling isolated and judged, questioning her choices and wondering if she would ever find acceptance. Now she was in a position to help other veterans navigate the same challenges she had faced. Her phone rang, and she saw it was her brother Mike calling from his base. "Hey sis, how's life treating you these days?" "Pretty good, Mike. I just helped another veteran who was going through what I went through. It felt good to pay it forward." "That's what it's all about," Mike replied. "Taking care of each other, honoring the fallen, and never forgetting where we came from." "Speaking of honoring the fallen," Sarah said, looking down at her tattoo, "I'm thinking about adding another element to the memorial. Something to represent hope and new beginnings. Sounds perfect. Those guys would be proud of what you've accomplished." As Sarah ended the call and drove home, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. The tattoo that had once seemed like a barrier to her future had become a bridge to meaningful work and genuine acceptance. She had learned that the right people would see past the surface to understand the depth of her character and commitment. Most importantly, she had learned that staying true to herself and her values was not just the right choice. It was the only choice that could lead to genuine happiness and success. The memorial on her arm would always remind her of the friends who had given everything for their country. And now it also reminded her of her own courage in refusing to compromise her identity for the approval of others. The story that had begun with judgment and rejection had become one of triumph and purpose. And Sarah knew that her journey was just beginning.